Pastor Infeld?
I say hi better if I unmute myself. Hi.
Yes. Hey, Pastor, your Rutgers guys were not very polite to my St. Bonaventure Bonnies in the basketball. Did you watch that, ma'am?
No.
Okay. Well, I can tell you it was not a pretty sight from our perspective.
Look, Rutgers can't play football. We've established this. You have to leave at least one sport that Rutgers can be mediocre at.
I'll stipulate to that, but not against my Bonnies.
Okay, fair. You're okay when they beat Clemson?
Good luck trying to. Rutgers. No, I'm sorry. Oh, that's right. It was Clemson. I'm sorry. I have two schools. So St. Bonaventure, my undergraduate school. Yeah, that was LSU that put a beating.
Oh, okay. I'm not responsible for LSU.
No.
Honestly, I'm not responsible for Rutgers either.
Weren't very polite, but it was Rutgers to Clemson. Yeah.
Yeah. I thought I was going to get more flack about that than I did.
Oh, well, you really deserve a lot, Pastor.
Clearly, yes.
Not polite at all. Anyway, I love the tournament. This is one of my favorite parts of the year, at least for both of us.
Yeah, we love it.
Yeah, we both love it.
I used to serve with a pastor who would take what I referred to as his Lenten pilgrimage every year to March Madness. And it worked really well because then I could have off after Easter and he'd already had a break.
It works out. It works out. Is Pastor Carter doing okay? I know he was a little under the weather.
Yeah, he's doing better. He was back in the office today and his usual Pastor Carter self.
Good. That's a good thing.
Yes. Keeps us on our toes. And
hello.
Good to see some other faces tonight. Welcome back. I'm going to say this again at the end, but we are meeting on the 2nd and 4th Tuesdays. So we'll actually have 2 weeks in between this book group and or 2 Tuesdays in between this book group and next book group. The next time we meet will be on April 13th. Basically, we're taking off Holy Week and the week after Easter. But just so you're all, I know we're all going to miss each other April 6th, but we'll pick back up the next week. Well, we've got a little bit of gathering time. I would love to hear, Lent this year has been the weirdest Lent. Last year, we started with what seemed like normal Lent, and then we went into completely different Lent. And this year, we started a completely different Lent. How have things been going?
Well, here in Florida, Lent's been going well. We've been meeting in person for a few months now with restrictions, and so we're having our Wednesday Lenten Holden service. So it feels like we're a little bit back home compared to last year. So that's a real positive thing for us.
Yeah. Holden Evening Prayer is a beautiful service. What are some other congregations doing for Lent, or people in your own practices?
Pastor, we are really in the throes of getting the plan together for reentry. That's really the focus, and quite frankly, that's taken over any real active Lenten activity, at least from our perspective. And so, outside of the virtual, which is still going strong, but outside of that, Pastor, the focus really has been on the reentry and re-energizing of what we're going to do. Yeah, that's fair. I think a lot of congregations are in that pattern in one way or another. I see from Lexanne that her congregation, Living Springs, is doing Walking Through Mark, which is awesome, and doing skits with real issues like mental illness and feeling out of control. That's a little too close to home. I don't know if I'm comfortable with that. I think feeling out of control is something that is always a relevant issue, but especially so far in years starting with 2020 and 2021. And I see Pastor Cannon has his Easter egg tree up. Very nice.
Thank you. It reminds me that we are getting close to Easter and I can get off my fast and we can start heading toward coming back together again.
Excellent.
Good evening.
Oh.
Good evening.
There's Pastor Jackie.
Here I am. I had trouble getting on. My internet connection something was wrong with it.
Well, I'm glad you found us.
Yes. Okay.
All right. Well, it is 6:31, so we will head on in. Thank you for sharing a little bit about what Lent has been like for some of us. This is the first year in a long time I haven't been in a parish for Lent, and so it's a new experience for me too. So tonight we are going to start with chapters 8 and 9, kind of picking those up from last time, and then we're going to be talking about the 8 pillars of caste. Chapter 8 starts on page 78 if you're in the hardback version. But of course, before we do all that, we will start with some devotions. All right, our devotion tonight will sound more like Advent than Lent. It is Mary's song, the Magnificat, from when she went to visit her cousin Elizabeth while she was pregnant with our Lord. Just a general announcement, if it tends to work best for background noise and for feedback if we are on mute when we're not speaking. So that'll help all of us participate in conversation. And then you can, of course, unmute yourself when you're ready to come on in and talk. All right, a reading from Luke chapter 1. And Mary said, "My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior. For he has looked with favor on the lowliness of his servant. Surely, from now on all generations will call me blessed. For the Mighty One has done great things for me, and holy is his name. His mercy is for those who fear him from generation to generation. He has shown strength with his arm. He has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. He has brought down the powerful from their thrones and has lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. He has helped his servant Israel in remembrance of his mercy, according to the promise he made to our ancestors, to Abraham and to his descendants forever." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. One of the things that I have, thank you. One of the things that I have always loved about this, besides the fact that I can hear all kinds of tunes going on in my head with it, between Holden Evening Prayer and Vespers from LBW and ELW, is the way that everything gets turned on its head. Mary's dream, echoing back to Hannah's dream when she was pregnant with the prophet Samuel, is that God would turn the world right side up for the first time in a long time. We saw the world right side up once, back in those first, 2 chapters of Genesis. And that was about the end of that. But as God's kingdom comes into its fullness, the rich are pulled down so that there is room for the lowly to be lifted up. Those who are full don't need any more, but the hungry get filled up. There is plenty for everyone. In the chapters in this entire book, but in the chapters that we're reading tonight, we see some of the ways that the world has been broken, that we have built walls where God would tear them down, where we have lifted up people who don't need to be lifted up, and we have shoved down those who should not be shoved down. Mary's prayer is our prayer, that God's kingdom would come. And we join in her song as we work together to do God's work in our time and in our places. Let's pray. Lord our God, we thank you for this time tonight, for the people who are gathered here, for those who will be part of this conversation through the recording and through our other sessions. We ask, Lord, that you would guide our conversation, guide our hearts and minds and thoughts. Lord, we pray that your kingdom would come and that we would get to be part of the glorious movement that bears your name and your seal. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Well, we are, as I said, starting with chapter 8. Chapters 8 and 9 we're picking up from last time because they needed some time. And they are shocking. Chapter 8 took me longer to process than any of the previous ones. And the further I get into this book, the more time I find that it's taking me not to read, but to absorb. I'm seeing some nodding. This is not everybody, this is a common experience. Yeah. And so we need to kind of take some time and pause on these to go to give them their due. The chapter 8 is about, of course, the Nazis and the acceleration of caste. And it starts with that meeting about how to go about dehumanizing the Jews, how to go about building a caste into a system that hadn't been, that hadn't had that caste in that way before. And yes, Kathy, absolutely. I spent some time trying to think through how to put words around this because it just keeps going and going. And I think one of the things that came back to me was that I'm used to thinking of Hitler as the worst of the worst, right? Hitler be, the ultimate of bad. If Dante were writing the Inferno again, it would be Hitler at the bottom of the circles of hell, right there with Judas, right? And yet the people advising him looked to the Jim Crow South and thought, well, we're not going to go that far, right? It realigns the standard for worst in a way that I think it took me a while to wrap my brain around. How did some of the rest of you experience this chapter? What were some of the surprises? What were some of the hardest parts? What were some of the things that took you a while to process on an emotional level?
Based on Nazism and Hitler, and thinking in terms of the atrocities that he did, all of a sudden I was reading and he took advice, came to America to find out how to do it. Now, that was a shocker to me. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even the terms on page 80, they talk about the Untermensch, subhuman underman, which I didn't realize was a German translation of an American work.
Yes.
An American eugenicist. Yes, absolutely.
And then, as you said earlier, he turned down some of the advice given by us. I mean, America.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Lexanne is lifting up the smell and the ashes that landed on the kids while they were playing outside. That's the beginning of chapter 9, but absolutely. The chapter 8 gives us kind of the intellectual, historical, and chapter 9 digs more into the images, the stories that come from the same root. I think one of the other things that really sticks out to me with this chapter is the lack of self-awareness that I'm seeing it in myself, but we also see it in some of the ways that Americans and others were acting or perceiving ourselves at the time. On page 81, this is there's the first big paragraph. This is the second one after that, or the one after that. By the time that Hitler rose to power, the United States, quote, was not just a country with racism. Whitman, the Yale Eagle scholar, wrote, it was the leading racist jurisdiction, so much so that even Nazi Germany looked to America for inspiration. The Nazis recognized the parallels, even if many Americans did not. And then they went on from there to talk about, and we're going to get into the definitions a little bit later on tonight as well, but talking about the American laws and the codification of the different castes. Who qualifies as what? Who will be given what label? What box to sit in? To use the terms from last study. Page 85 talks about this a little bit. It says the tangle of American definitions lent a measure of latitude and a useful inconsistency to the task of human division. The Americans had come up with a definition of race apart from logic or science, an approach that Freisler calls the political construction of race. So we're seeing the legal precedent not only on the level of the stringency of the penalties and the restrictions of caste behaviors, but we're also seeing that the definitions are just plain made up. And put into the legal system by those who were writing it. I've got a note in chat that asking me to put the chat dialogue on the side so everyone can read it. I can't do that, but if you go down to the bottom of your screen on a computer, you'll see a little button that says chat. And if you push that, it'll tap open to the side and you should be able to read it. What I can't give you, if you will chat, if you have a chat that you want everyone to hear or see, you need to do that to everyone rather than putting it just to me. Anything that's just to me, only I see. But anything that's to everyone or that you want to add to the general conversation, please put in that everyone thing so that we can all be part of it. Part of the reason I read them out loud too is because those don't show up on the recording. And I know that although we weren't able to get last session recorded, I'm sorry that didn't work. That is another way that people are participating and I want them to get the fullness of it.
Pastor.
Yes, ma'am.
So two things that struck me, and I don't exactly know what page it was on, but in my notes I had written that that there was. Here's what struck me is that it said that there was a paradox of proclaiming liberty for all men in America while holding subsets of its citizenry in near total subjugation. And then if you take that and you combine it on page 83. the second full paragraph there, it says that the Nazis noticed that in the United States, when it came to these racial prohibitions, quote, public opinion accepted them as natural. And those two things combined just shook me in my boots.
Yeah.
That everyone thought it was fine, even though we say everyone.
Well, and when we think of everyone thinking it was fine, I think what we mean is the dominant caste didn't notice. Those who were not dominant caste, were surely aware. Okay, yeah, I'm getting some nods. Good. I can't help but think that had to be true. And we'll see in the Pillars of Caste, some of the ways that the system was built was trying to maintain that air of naturalness, or the facade of it. Having enslaved people dance and sing while they were being sold away from their families, to try to hide the atrocity of all of it. John, I see your hand.
Pastor, thank you. What was striking to me was that the Nazis, for all intents and purposes, started in 1936. By 1945, it's over. So a period of 9 years. Yet here in the United States, when you talk about racism, we immediately turn to the ultimate sense of racism and caste, and we talk about Nazis and we talk about Hitler. That was a 9-year period. We're into it hundreds of years. It was codified. It was legalized. It was in the Constitution. And somehow, if somebody says, who's the biggest racist in history of mankind, everybody points to Hitler. I'm not saying that he wasn't, and I'm not trying to defend him. But I'm saying 9 years and gone. And by the way, the reaction of the German people and their government has been reactionary towards that period, whereas here we are fighting to keep it in place. This is stunning to me, hundreds of years into this process.
Levon, I saw you nodding. Was there something you wanted to add to that? Okay. You're on mute.
He looks like he's frozen. Doesn't look like he's
What about now?
There we go.
Okay.
Now we got you.
I want to start by sharing what I was reminded of, and in my journey in terms of trying to come together as a people rather than as a separate race. And here of late, I'm sorry about that. Here of late, I have encountered people here of late that would say to me, I didn't know it was like that. I'm talking white folks saying I never realized that it was like that. And here in this particular conversation, if you're looking at the origin of how that could be possible. Now, there was a while in my life, I couldn't believe I could look you in your face, look in a white person's face, and they say to me they didn't realize what was going on. But I do understand the training and this whole system we're going by is talking about how a subject was identified and the steps that it took in order for it to get to where it's going. I'm also amazed about, or not amazed, but I'm appreciative of the idea that have an old man fart. Can't remember. What I want to say. I'll come back to it. I won't hold you up, but I'll bring it back. I promise.
Okay, it'll come back around. At least mine usually does.
Yeah.
So, yeah, as I said, I think this chapter will probably have bits and pieces that we'll come back to, but I want to give some room too for chapter 9. Pastor Jackie, will you guide our conversation through the evil of silence?
Okay, I most certainly will. As you said before, when you said how hard it was to read chapter 8, I'm beginning to realize that the deeper we get this reading, it's a hard read. It just really is a disturbing hard read. And so as we look at chapter 9, with the evil of silence, let's see, the evil of silence, beginning on page 89. And then I think this is what Lexanne was in reference to about, of course, this is a crematorium of people, of human bodies, of human flesh. And from my understanding, this was taking place over in Berlin. And this was, having to do with the Nazis. I imagine that with the burning, cremation Jews of the Jewish people. This is the way I was kind of understanding it. And so you have people that are watching and people that are observing the burning of human flesh, but having to go about their daily life. And I just want to just point out on page 90, where the Dietrich Bonhoeffer quote, that silence in the face of evil is itself evil. This is what Bonhoeffer said of bystanders. And he said, God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. And so while flesh is burning and there's ashes of human flesh flying through the air, and then it ends on this, that the mothers pull their children inside when the wind kicks up, herd them along to keep them from being covered in the ash of fellow human beings. This chapter 9 lifts up pretty much 5, is it vignettes? Is that word vignette? Instead of vignette, Emily. You know me and my English. 5
you had it right,
up.
Pastor. You had it right.
Yeah,
vignette.
Yeah, 5 vignettes are lifted up in this particular chapter. And so this first one is of, the human flesh, human crematory, and the ashes going about while people were going along with their daily lives.
Pastor.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr.
It just reminds us of how we compromise or we become comfortable with situations because we're afraid to speak up. It was just amazing to me how that community, while those ashes was falling on, that community was comfortable, had become comfortable. It was irritated by it, but comfortable with it. Or maybe I should be using the word acceptance of it, of this human flesh and the ashes falling. That was a sign of acceptance, defeat, if you will, in a lot of ways. So I just wanted to throw that in.
Okay, all right, good. Thanks for that, Mr. Griffin. So at this time, I would pretty much try to include the rest of you with which of these, if you've read this particular chapter, there's 5 of them, and I could look at this one as we got, the next one would be considered the lynching tree, and then others will be considered lynchings of bodies hanging, from poles or whatever, and people actually watching and observing, like festivities, the lynching of people. Is there any of these particular ones of the 5 that struck anybody in any particular way that you'd like to maybe share or speak on of the 5? If not,
Wiley McNeely was grisly and unreal. That he was Wiley McNeely, 1921, burned to death. But before he's burned to death, they cut off his digits. They bartered over who was going to get a finger, who was going to get an ear. They mutilated him while he was alive, in pain, suffering, and then set him on fire. Just the inhumanity of it was just absolutely unbelievable. And 1921 wasn't that long ago.
That's right. That's right. Thanks for sharing.
The other thing was that the head was the most expensive part of the body. When we go back to talking about, I can't remember back when about the Buddha, how Buddha came in and they constructed this whole hierarchy. They structured from the head down, and when you got to the feet, it was that was the lowest of low. So the whole thing was, even those body parts were so based on that understanding of the body, based on that understanding of the function of it on the body. It was priced that way as well.
Right. Good. Thanks for sharing. Emily, I see where you made it, and it fits so well. How Jesus was being crucified, Jesus was being put to a brutal death, and the soldiers were down there gambling for his clothes. And so between page 91 and 92, where they were getting ready to burn this man, they were literally casting lots. They were gambling for the body parts. They were literally gambling for his body parts. And let's see. And so while they were debating over who was going to get what parts of this person, of this human's body, after they had kidnapped him outside of the law, it says on page 92, the leaders debated this in front of the 500 people who had come to watch the man die and who were impatient for the festivities to begin, because this was a festival for the people. It says, after the men had decided and after all was settled, then they lit the match. And so this human being was being put to death, burned to death, and they were gambling over his digits. Okay, so that's one of the vignettes. Anyone want to point out another one of them that stood out to them?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
On page 92, we have Reuben Stacy, and then that's in 1935. That's not too long ago, in Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
Right,
and
right.
That they took him and they blooded him. They riddled him with bullets. They handcuffed him and snapped his head from the lynching rope, killed for frightening a white woman. Now, also with that, on page 93, we find that they had a photographer there, and this photographer then would take pictures, and then they would make cards, and they would sell the cards. They were treated as if they were not humans. Yes.
That's a rebuttal.
Yep. Yep, right, Reverend Cannon. That particular one points out, because this was one I was going to lift up even more, is that while these lynchings and burnings and things took place, postcards became popular.
Postcards.
To literally send loved ones postcards of these people who were brutalized and killed. And this postcard was a part of, they were lynching postcards, and it was a part of the custom. And it says at the bottom of page 93, this was singularly American, because even the Nazis did not stoop to selling souvenirs, okay? So they didn't make souvenirs out of their horrific deeds that they did. Lynching postcards were so common, a form of communication in turn of the 20th century America, that lynching scenes became a burgeoning sub-department of the postcard industry. To move it along, eventually the U.S. Postmaster banned the cards from the mail. And so, of course, this did not stop the mailing of it, because the people just continued to get the cards and put them in envelopes and mailed them still. So that was pretty horrific.
Pastor Jackie?
That was, yes.
One of the things that I found interesting about that particular, that Reuben Stacy was murdered for frightening a white woman, yet at the same time it tells about this little girl who was watching this almost as entertainment, And just that whole paradox of what he's being murdered for and how the crowd is reacting around it is just it adds another layer of indecency and sickness to it.
That's right. That's right. I agree with that, Amanda. It's when I looked at each one of these vignettes, read about them, it showed it's dehumanizing, but it almost shows like a cannibalistic, barbaric nature of human beings to devalue other human bodies with being tortured and mutilated and killed, to actually have no feeling, absolutely no feeling, and to see it as a festival or a carnival. So to move along with this particular chapter, this last vignette, which is the one that I would say was the one that I was affected by the most, and this is on page 94, ends on page 96, was in 1919 in Omaha, when they were getting ready to, I believe, there was a man that was being hung.
Willie Brown.
Is that who it was? Willie Brown.
Will Brown.
Was being hung. Right. I think the reason he was being hung was, well, actually, I think was he being burned as well in this particular lynching? It says 15,000 people gathered for this. Okay.
After they burned the courthouse down to get to him, the last full paragraph on page 95 talks about what they did.
Okay, right, because, oh yeah, Emily, on page 95, they burned the courthouse down and cut the water hoses so that the firefighters would not be able to put out the blaze. See, this to me, this mob mentality, they were a mob, but they were becoming like animalistic, so to speak, to the point that anybody would get hurt if they got in the way. Because it says here too, once they cut the water hoses so the firefighters couldn't put it out, the mayor who tried to appeal to the mob, they put a rope around his neck and inflicted injuries that put him in the hospital. Now, mayor being white, just like them, his life was put into danger, was endangered by trying to step up. So you can see how silence is not a hard thing to be. If your life is going to be in jeopardy. And so the leaders of the mob pulled Brown from the rooftop of the courthouse, okay? And they stripped Willie Brown. Wait a minute. And those up front fought each other to beat him. They fought each other to beat Willie Brown. They hoisted him half conscious onto a lamppost outside the courthouse. Then they fired bullets into his dangling body, cheering as they fired, and it was from these gunshots that the coroner said that Brown had died. They burned his body in the bonfire that they had made in the courthouse square. Then they tied the body to a police car and dragged the corpse through the streets of Omaha. The thing about this is, while all this is going on, there are spectators all watching. And what I think is so phenomenal about this is when it gets to Henry Fonda, the 14-year-old boy, and his father across the street from the courthouse who witnessed all of this in the middle of the riot, how Henry Fonda was that 14-year-old boy. He witnessed this. He would leave Omaha when he grew up to make a name for himself as a leading man in Hollywood. It says Fonda's father locked the plant and drove home in silence. Bless their poor hearts, they witnessed this barbaric act and they couldn't even talk about it. They were helpless. It was like, well, what could the two of them have done to stop anything? but yet they were silent about it. And I thought it was interesting as this chapter ends here, that it was perhaps no coincidence that Fonda would appear in many movies in which he was the moral voice calling for a life to be spared. Now, before reading this story and learning this, I was always kind of moved by Henry Fonda's roles that he played. And even his daughter, Jane, how she developed this humanitarian philanthropy, thrive for philanthropy. And now I'm seeing where it came from. To me, this is what I'm seeing. I was enlightened by reading this story here, having watched many of Henry Fonda's movies and admiring him as an actor, because it says that it was perhaps no coincidence that he would appear in many movies which he was the moral voice calling for a life to be spared. In the 1943 film, The Oxbow Incident, about vigilante violence, it is Fonda's character who warns a blood-lusting mob. Man just naturally can't take the law into his own hands and hang people without hurting everybody in the world. And I look at that of what he and his father, the hurt that they felt, seeing what happened to Willie Brown, witnessing the law being taken into the hands of that angry mob, and they couldn't do anything about it. And they just silently observed it and drove home. And I know he carried that with him for the rest of his life.
Pastor. It's mind-boggling how we're reading this and how it's speaking to mob violence and all of this. And here we are, a week or so between 16 people, I think if my numbers are correct, 16, 17 people having been massacred in the manner that they were massacred in, and being able for me to see the parallel and intensity of what a mob looks like, because we're seeing it pretty much every day now on our TV. So we're not only being able to read and be able to try to look back and imagine what that could possibly look like. We're actually living that very same mentality and mindset.
Right.
That little girl in that story, to me, personally speaking, was a symbol of how our children have been taught to feel and think. In Western days, when they went to a hanging, they took the children because they were engraving that thought in their mind that this particular person should die, but you should live, and if necessary, you should be the one to put that person to death. It's just so much parallel in what we're reading and what we're talking about today, present day, not even 48, 50 hours old, but present day, and we happen to be where we are in this book, speaking on that tree, those ashes, the dissemination of the bodies and all of that. I just wanted to just have a voice in that this is an actual thing going on. We're just getting I'm looking at the root.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay. Thank you, Minister Griffin. I overlooked Amanda. I believe Amanda had her hand up. Sorry, I didn't recognize it when she.
No, you got her, Jackie. You got her. You got her.
Okay.
That was from a few minutes ago. You're fine.
Okay. All right. Well, I think I'm done with this, and it's time to look at our part, the 8 pillars of Caste, would you say?
So, the next section of the book is where the subtitle of the whole book comes from: The Foundations of Caste, the Origins of Our Discontents. And in this, she talks about 8 pillars, 8 kind of foundational principles of the caste systems across the board that she has studied. And We have about 50 minutes right now, which means that we could spend a little bit of time on each. But I'm wondering, for purposes of making sure that we, hit on what's most important to this group, are there some places that, are there some pillars that people want to make sure that we get some time with?
With your asking that question, and like whatever part I'm covering, there is a pillar that I, for one, would love to.
All right. Well, you're part of this group. Which pillar do you want to cover?
Well, it would be the next pillar after the one that you would do. But if you know what I'm saying, it comes in the order of.
Okay.
Like,
so you want pillar 2?
It would be pillar number 2. It would be pillar number 2.
Okay.
So, but did you want to do the? How did you?
Well, I figure we'll see if there's things that are most helpful for people, and then we can spend more time on those and give a little bit less gaps to the others so that we have time to focus on what's most important to this group.
Okay.
Good question.
I think that Minister Griffin told us about what's happening today. Mm-hmm. We have a tendency to overlook things that are happening now. And therefore, we go back and there was a dog and pony show with the gathering of evil people to dehumanize individuals and do them any kind of way. Now, we are silent as a church sometimes. Especially now we're talking about the Asian Americans, and we don't talk about, we thank God that our church sent out some laments about this, but we as pastors and we as individuals have not spoken up for our Asian Americans and not spoken up for the African Americans, and we need to do this. We need to come together and realize that we are all in this together. And so as we go through these pillars, then we need to discuss how can we work together to make sure that we bring out all of this stuff that's hindering us from working together as a church.
Thank you. That's a really good point. Yeah, one of the things that really struck me this past week after the shootings outside Atlanta, one of my Facebook friends who lives nowhere near, he's not in the Southeast, asked if he could call out of work Asian because he was just depressed, didn't want to get out of bed, didn't want to face the world in the state that it was in. He, of course, decided to eventually, but that sense of it's not something that happened over there. It's not something that happened to someone else. This is a trauma that affects us all. And the closer that the victims are to our identities, the more we're going to feel it. But as LaVon pointed out, this happens to all of us. We're not aiming for a world where it's that happened to them, but anytime that one of us is dehumanized, we are all dehumanized. So let's not hearing too much else from the crowd. We will plow forward. Okay, so pillar number 8. Thank you, Heather. Is divine will and the laws of nature. In India, this is one of the places where it's most well defined. The texts literally just line up who goes where and which subcastes do what, and it's all of the things because this is what Manu has declared. And that is how it rolled for many, many, many generations. And in America, the people who wanted to codify slavery went back to the Judeo-Christian scriptures, to the book of Genesis, to the Noah story and the curse of Ham, which I read the first time I read about this was in college, and I went back and went, what? That's not there. It's not there. But this is the role that people took, and they ran with it. in ways that they wanted to. My seminary professors would have called this eisegesis, reading into the text what we wanted or what they wanted instead of what's really there. And one of the places that we see this most clearly in that first one is on page 103. The second to the last paragraph. The curse of Ham is now being executed upon his descendants. Thomas R. Cobb, a leading Confederate and defender of slavery, wrote, "The great architect had framed them both physically and mentally to fill the sphere in which they were thrown. His wisdom and mercy combined in constituting them thus suited to the degraded position they were destined to occupy." And he believed that. And people believed that.
Wow. Emily, one thing that's interesting to me as a parallel about the natural law argument is how the natural law argument has been used to keep homosexuals and gay and lesbian people persecuted as well, because it is a natural law and you're against the way God made you. And so it began when we start saying use of natural law, it becomes a way of using a big stick to keep people down and to heap hate and scorn and make scapegoats out of people. And we've done that with the LGBTQ community as well as we have with African Americans and other castes. So I just want to mention that as a modern parallel.
Well, and women and there's a lot of I see Heather's hand.
Right.
Well, and I think it's also important for us to recognize that when we say this is what God wants us to do, it makes us feel better about feeling that way and about thinking that way. It makes us feel justified in saying that, because if this is what God wants us to do, I mean, who are we to argue? God wants it.
Right. Isn't that what the Crusaders yelled?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
God wills it. Or in a more modern telling of that, Bob Dylan had a song with God on our side. Y'all, this is Olivia and Blanche.
Hi.
Hey, Olivia.
We are bringing up the next generation. And the cats. St. Francis would be proud. Okay, thank you. Yeah, we tend to, I think, use God sometimes as a weapon or as a shield for our own defenses, for those things that we don't want to see. And that's one of those places where religion can be really dangerous. Because we are supposed to be the people who follow God, not the people who shape God in our own image. I'm pretty sure there's a commandment about that. So yeah, that's the first of the pillars addresses that, and I'm gonna pass it on over to Jackie for pillar number 2.
Okay, pillar number 2 is heritability. Heritability. And what I found to be very interesting is how rank has to be assignable at birth. Where a person falls, on the rungs of the ladder, top or bottom, lower caste or upper, is the family that you're born into. And I thought it was interesting how she pointed out that for the most part, in general, a child was ranked by who the father was, by the race of the father. And then in America, dating back to colonial Virginia, children inherited the caste of their mother, both by law and custom. And then there was a question that if a Negro woman had a child by an Englishman, what would the child be, slave or free? And then, of course, if the child is going to take on the class of the mother, then of course the child would be a slave. What I thought was very ironic was how the slave owner would literally impregnate the Negro woman, the slave, to produce children, and those children would be born into his heritage and could remain enslaved and produce labor and make the slave owner a richer person.
It turns rape into profit.
Rape into profit. Wow.
Yeah.
Now, I've seen this in a lot of the slave movies. I had, from a child and growing up, I discovered this from a lot of the slave movies that they would show. And that's why as I got older, I stopped watching them because it was too degrading. That the black womb was turned into a profit center and drew sharper lines around the subordinate caste, as neither mother nor child could make a claim against an upper caste man. And no child springing from a black womb could escape condemnation to the lowest rung. In this particular one where it became a part of skin color, either light skin or dark skin, I remember as a young girl growing up in the South, discovering how and learning that there were actually Negroes who would pass for white. They were born with such light features, you know, their features and their light skin, their hair, what have you. And I remember when I became a teenager, I would say, I don't blame them. Who wouldn't want to pass for white if you could pass for white? And you know, and all of this came back to me when I was reading this particular chapter here. But this is a part where I think the author does a very good case about bringing out the difference between caste and class. On page 106, it says, it is the fixed nature of caste that distinguishes it from class, a term to which it is often compared. Class is an altogether separate measure of one's standing in a society, marked by level of education, income, and occupation. If you can act your way out of it, then it is class. You're born in caste, and you die in caste. Class you can grow out of. You can go from lower class to upper class in the society that we live in, but you can't grow out of caste. Anybody have any thoughts they'd like to share?
Pastor Early, if I could.
Yes, John.
Yeah, sir. I'm really, really glad that you brought this that second pillar up, because it was really, really striking to me, because there are two things. Within the society, it's insidious and it's also deceitful. I was brought up by my mom, who prescribed this idea that if you study hard, if you work real hard, if you speak the language in a certain way, you can get out of this caste. Now, she didn't call it a caste, but she said, hey, you can meld in. And that's the lie that we project on people. The idea, people of color and people that are in other castes, that if you work real hard, if you get educated, that somehow you're going to transcend this. It's not true. And it came to me, I was sitting there with my son. I won't go through all the details, but the bottom line is, we were down in Charleston. My son and I were at a home of a very, very dear friend. Her mother was with us, and I thought all of these people are fairly progressive, when all of a sudden the topic turned to Oprah Winfrey. And I thought, oh, okay, great. Oprah Winfrey. And what happened thereafter was absolutely searing in my mind and in the mind of my son, who sat there while this woman, who I thought she's educated, I know that, very classy lady, very bright lady, said, well, Oprah Winfrey, now there's somebody. Oprah Winfrey is rich, but she's still an N-word. And I thought, that didn't just happen. I looked over to my son, and both of us looked like, this can't be happening. This is a nightmare. And she said, yeah, I said it. You know, she might have all that money and she's got a lot of power, but she is still, and she said it again, her grandson got up from the table and left, much to his credit. And so this was stunning to me. And I wish that my mom, God bless her soul, because she did everything from the best of intentions. She brought us up to believe that if you work real hard, people would never, ever term us a spick or something else. That's not true. It doesn't matter how many master's degrees. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You're in there. You're not coming out, pal. You might be accepted because they have to. There are certain laws and regulations and protocols. But you're still among many in that cast. And I thought it was absolutely stunning, and I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah. Well, good. Thanks for sharing that, John, because guess what? If your mother were alive today, Beth, and I'm going to come to you, you would be able to say, Mom, guess what I discovered? You can work your way out of a class to another class. You can go from low class to middle class to upper class. That we can do if we study hard enough and work hard enough. I myself believe I'm a living example of that, because I came from real dirt poor living, but I worked hard and I got education and I moved up just a little bit from low class to possibly middle class a little bit, but I'm still in the lower caste until I die. You see, so that's one thing. Beth, what did you want to share? Beth?
Yes, I just wanted to say I have 4 children, 3 sons and a daughter. And our third son is probably considered the most all-American boy. He was the athlete. He was the comic. He's very popular in school, but he was spit upon and he was ostracized. And despite having the name Neubauer, he still has what he inherited, and that is his Indian background. He's our son by adoption. He was born in Calcutta, came to us at 11 weeks. So he was really raised as his siblings were raised. But anybody who wants to say there's no racism in America, there's no caste system in America, simply needs to look at our family, because he's had a very different road to travel than his siblings.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Beth.
The example sheet, page 107, about the Academy Award actor Forrest Whitaker, was a power of 2013. This distinguished actor, Nobel actor, Academy Award-winning actor, gets frisked in a restaurant because he turns around and didn't order anything. Goes into and they think he looks suspicious. Well, they think he looks suspicious because he's black and he didn't buy anything. They thought maybe he stole something, and he's frisked and humiliated. And that's absolutely racism. And that was a powerful story of how subtle these biases continue to, what made that white employee think that he or she could frisk this black man. It galls you. It's really disgusting. It's very frustrating.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that, because I looked at that too, and that just goes back to say about Oprah Winfrey and all of her millions. She tried to go into an expensive shoe store.
Yes.
In New York City or somewhere. And you have to ring the doorbell to get in. And they clearly let her know, why would you bother wanting to come in? You can't afford they didn't recognize her. They didn't recognize who she was, but she was in that dark skin that she was born in, that past that she is in. They told her she wouldn't be able to afford the shoe in that store, okay? And so it happens to quite a few celebrities. It says on the book, on the same page, 107, it says, neither wealth nor celebrity has insulated those born to the subordinate caste from the police brutality that seems disproportionately, trained on those at the bottom of the hierarchy. And it shows where a New York City police officer broke an NBA player's leg outside of a nightclub. And the injury left the player, a forward for the Atlanta Hawks, disabled for the rest of the season. And it resulted in a $4 million settlement, the proceeds of which the player promptly said he would donate to a foundation for public defenders. So as an NBA player, he was upper class. He made good money, but it still didn't stop him from getting his career ended by the brutality of law enforcement.
Pastor Jackie?
Yes.
I just want to throw this one in. This white guy was arguing with these other white guys about who were the greatest black basketball players were, you know, and he was naming all of them, but he was calling them the N-word, and he's this and that. So finally, one of the guys asked him, he says, well, what about Michael Jordan? He said, oh man, no, Michael Jordan ain't black. So the whole point was Michael Jackson was such a great basketball player. So he's kind of, if that's the case, then he made it outside the rim because they didn't consider him black because he was such a great basketball player. I just wanted to throw that in.
Yes, well, good.
Sister Jackie, if you turn to page 108 and read that for us too.
I was going to do that. I'm going to read that, and that's how I'm going to close out this particular pillar. Good, Reverend Cannon. But Kathy Harris said that she recalls something similar happening to Eddie Murphy on an elevator. There's tons of stories.
Well, and these are the ones we hear.
Black celebrities,
And these are the ones we hear.
Right. Yeah,
these are celebrities have a platform to tell the stories.
Point.
I'm sure that there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of stories we don't hear.
Yes.
I share with Bishop Oates, and a group, the first book study we was in, we were talking and I shared with them the fact that the woman asked, I was in the grocery store buying a few things, just hand things, right? So when I got through paying for it, she asked me, did I want a bag? No, she didn't want to give me a bag, and I asked her for a bag. So I was sharing with Bishop Yost and them that I knew that if I had walked out that store with those items in my hand, I'd have been subject to arrest, depending upon the circumstances at the time. So I had to have a bag in order to at least try to get from the store to my car. Yeah, and that's true to this day.
The end of this particular pillar with heritability and how you cannot live out of caste. You can't grow out of caste. You can grow out of class, but you can't grow out of caste. On page 108, this is a statement by NBA player, another great, LeBron James. Says, no matter how great you are, no matter how great you become in life, no matter how wealthy you become, how people worship you, or what you do, NBA star LeBron James told reporters just the year before, if you are an African-American man or African-American woman, you will always be that. And bottom line is, John, the word that the person referred to, the N-word that was referred, that Oprah Winfrey was called, Lauren in a nice way said, you're going to always be that African-American, but that was just being polite.
Right.
Because bottom line is, no matter how big you make it, you're still the N-word, bottom line. And every black person knows that. Every African-American knows that.
It's a given.
They know that. Okay, so that ends this particular one. And Emily, what are you going to do about the pillars? Because I know we're going to probably have to finish some of these pillars next week.
The other pillars that were lifted up for a conversation were pillars 7 and 8. And so I want to make sure that we hit those. Okay. Swing back to 3 through 6.
Yeah. Okay.
Pillar number 7 starts on page 151. It is terror as enforcement and cruelty as a means of control. And I think we have actually hit on some of these themes already tonight. That lynching tree right in the middle of the intersection where it blocks everybody's view that can't come down because it's a means of control is pillar number 7 in a tree form. That is what it looks like in the middle of a small town. And the first paragraph here is, as I put in my notes, it's a terrible truth. Evil asks little of the dominant caste other than to sit back and do nothing. You know, all the dominant caste has to do is not look, not see, not notice. You're going to have to forgive me. I've forgotten which prophet it is. But God says to one of the prophets that the people of Israel will look but not understand, listen, hear but not listen. That the prophet will speak and the people will not comprehend what God is doing. And there's some of that is what we're talking about. That being surrounded by this evil and not seeing it, not understanding it, that is what we're looking to overcome in conversations like this. But that is what is going to be necessary for us to uproot it and to be rehumanized together. This one, I had brutal examples. Andrew Jackson's bridle reins for his horse being made out of the skin of indigenous people. Yeah. Yes, Kathy, that was how I felt about that. Yeah. But can you imagine being, because I mean, he led people along the Trail of Tears with those reins. You know, seeing that as your skin or your family, you know, and then to see that, but that level of cruelty being carried out in all kinds of ways, the public burnings and lynchings and dismemberments of people, the ways that the Nazis would make other captives watch the public lynchings. And the same thing happened with enslaved people. It happens in every chance of terror. That's what terrorism is, right? We see that in the mass shootings of today. The women who were killed in the Atlanta area for being Asian and working in massage parlors, being temptations. What the heck is that? Like there's a whole level of church culture there that we don't have time to get into tonight. But that is enough to set the hair on edge of anyone who fits anything like that. It's enough to, you know, it changes the behavior pattern of a whole group of people because of violence against a few. That's what the whole chapter is talking about here. That's what this pillar is. And then to make it worse, using lower caste people as instruments of that torture. Having fellow prisoners be the ones to put people into and take remains out of the ovens. Having family members or Black funeral directors come and collect the bodies of those who were lynched. This is, and as you were saying earlier, Jackie, to be like Henry Fonda and his father, what else is there to do? To be trapped. To try to figure out how to live in a humane way, to be a full person when you're stuck in that system, when there are people actively trying to not only harm you, but keep you living in constant fear.
Right.
Heather, did I see your hand? Oh, I'm sorry, Jackie.
No, I'm just saying, I thought Heather's hand was up, but no.
Heather, you're on mute.
You'd think I know how to do this by now, right? It's been a year. You'd think I know how to work the mute button.
7:38 at night. Nobody knows our names anymore.
On page 153, that second paragraph was one that just gave me so much perspective. Not that I didn't know this, but the way that she wrote it, The crimes of homicide, of rape, and of assault and battery were felonies in the slavery era as they are today in any civilized society. They were seen then as wrong, immoral, reprehensible, and worthy of the severest punishment. But the country allowed most any atrocity to be inflicted on the Black body. Thus, 12 generations of African Americans face the ever-present danger of assault and battery or worse every day of their lives during the quarter millennium of enslavement. And that speaks into the dehumanization as well, right? Because yes, of course, these are reprehensible acts, but if you don't see someone as human, then somehow it's
Right.
morally okay. You know, it's somehow fine.
Yes. Emily, if I may,
standard is something that really
to what-
gets us. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, what Heather was just saying, having read that paragraph and saying how, and that's just the way it is, because the country allowed most of these atrocities when it comes to, you know, the African American, you know, facing the danger. And I just like to ask this question at this moment: how many on this call here this evening are aware that after Dylan Roof killed the 9 people in Emmanuel, that the police officers that picked him up took him to Burger King to get food? Or any of you, Kathy, I see your hand. Any others aware of that? I saw it with my own eyes. Nobody told me this. And a lot of people didn't see it when I mentioned it to them. I saw the entire thing. And if you'd ask any African American today, had it been that it was a black male that had walked into a white church and literally took the lives of 9 innocent worshipers, white worshipers in a church, that police officers would have picked him up and took him, let him live. That to me speaks to, you know, these crimes and things that are inflicted on people, and how the country just sits by. And so if you weren't aware of that, about the cops taking Dylan Roof.
Yeah.
Well, and I thought of the same thing too, Pastor Jackie, that and that I also, the Atlanta shooter, I read the recounting of how he was captured, and he was allowed to sit in his car for 30 seconds after being told to get out of the car. And he was able to get out of the car on his own power, knowing he had weapons inside the car. Right? Nobody shot first and asked questions later in that situation. And it's once you see it, you can't unsee it. Like once you see Dylan Roof being taken to Burger King, after what he'd done, or a police spokesman saying that a mass murderer just had a bad day, you can't unsee it.
It's funny you say that now. It clearly showed that, well, first of all, let me just say here in America, ask any African American, whenever there's a perpetrator who shoots up and kills some people, if they don't say the race of the person in the news reports at first, we automatically know the race of the shooter. If they don't say the race, but if it is an African American who does the shooting, it's going to be said immediately. The picture's going to be shown immediately, and the race is going to be said immediately. And I saw on Facebook the other day that someone said, oh, by the way, this shooter in Atlanta, you never said what race he was, but of course you didn't have to. When you told me he was taken alive, I knew that he was white. See, when you told me he was taken alive, so for the most part, if the shooter was black and had taken lives like that, 9 times out of 10 they're not taken alive. That's just that's just the way it's been in history for so long. So Emily, did we get too far away from what we're looking at here? Cruelty as a means of control.
So No. This is one of those things that's just going to keep spiraling and building on itself, right? Because look at the last little scene in this. On page 157, 158, a young white anthropologist from Yale University, John Dollard, goes south in 1935 to do some research. And he says to another white man, "The Negroes seem to be very polite around here." They have to be. And what do mothers teach their African American sons? How to handle a traffic stop.
Keep your hands on the steering wheel.
Yes,
the talk. It's called the talk.
And be polite.
1935, 2021. It's the same concept, but it's playing out differently.
Exactly.
Right. Absolutely. I see Kathy making comments in the chat, Kathy.
And I see Sandra's hand.
Yeah, Sandra. Okay.
Y'all know, a lot of you know CC Mills, who works in the office in North Carolina, and Kathleen knows her because she was in Virginia. But CC has a son who's 26, and she says she prays him home every day when he leaves the house.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's right. That's the way it is.
Amanda's pointing out that African American daughters are taught the same thing, and
oh yeah, that is right. Oh, thanks, Amanda. Thank you. How could I not be able to say that?
Yeah.
You know,
thank you.
African American children, period, are taught that. Your life is in jeopardy every time you get pulled over. If you ever get pulled over,
and you're going
by a cop, by a white cop, your life is in jeopardy if you are African. But it's true.
And this is going to be a very strange connection, but there's a really interesting, thoughtful episode of Brooklyn Nine-Nine about this. And thoughtful is not usually a word that goes with Brooklyn Nine-Nine, but it's a good episode.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Emily, what about, you said earlier, I heard you kind of say, those Asian women, victims who were shot. It was also said on the news that it's not a hate crime. It had nothing to do with race. They're arguing this still.
Yeah, of course they're arguing. Yeah, but
that it's not race related. It's not a hate crime.
You tell an Asian American woman that. We need to hit pillar number 8. Inherent superiority versus inherent inferiority. And we're at about 15 minutes here, but that again comes into the everyday social markers of life. Jackie, I'm gonna let you take this one, but it last time we met, we talked about Miss.
Yes.
Because her father watched the women in his family be disrespected, and he guaranteed he would call his daughter Miss. And that is fighting against this pillar. So I'll let you take it from there.
This pillar, inherent superiority versus inherent inferiority. That word inherent, it almost kind of like says again, you belong in a class, act like it. You don't act outside of your class. So even to start off on page 159, it even shows where a Black actress has to literally learn ways of inferiority to play a role in the movie with white women. And when I saw this, the first thing I think of was Gone with the Wind. Miss Scarlet. What is it, Janet Leigh, or was that actress Janet Leigh? Janet Leigh. She was beautiful. To me, she was a beautiful white, porcelain-skinned white woman in this movie as a young person when I was watching it. And she had these 2 Black actresses in the movie with her. Was it Butterfly McLean or Hattie, somebody? And they were running around looking like, There was a certain role that they had to play. And so what this author points out is that it's inherent that because of the caste that you're born in, if you're born in the lower caste, you're inferior. And if you're born in the dominant caste, then you are superior. Let's see, on page 160, it says, beneath each pillar of caste was the presumption and continual reminder of the inborn superiority of the dominant caste and the inherent inferiority of the subordinate. Now, see, there's one caste, one pillar of caste that we'll cover the next time. It's like, well, I won't even read the book anymore. You know, if I don't read the rest of this book, that one, the pillar of purity and pollution. Emily, I believe that's pillar 4, and you said it's in depth. Pillar 4 is...
Yeah, pillar 4 is one of the longest.
Yeah, pillar 4, if I'm not mistaken, is the purity versus pollution. And that's the one that really digs deep on, like I said, it was not enough that the designated people groups be separated for reasons of pollution or that they not intermarry, and those are 2 of the pillars. What's that word, endogamy? Laws against people marrying out of their race that used to exist, and then purity over pollution. This particular pillar here is saying that, but that it must be understood in every interaction that one group was superior and inherently deserving of the best in a given society, and that those who were deemed lowest were deserving of their plight. On page 161, as we look at this, it even says how there were clothes and fabrics that the Negro had to wear. And it's called Negro cloth. You're not supposed to wear. See, lower class people are not supposed to dress like upper class. Not if you're from the lower caste. Not class, actually, but caste. And so I thought that was really something to see. On page 161, in America, the South Carolina Negro Code of 1735 went so far as to specify the fabric enslaved Black people were permitted to wear, forbidding any that might be seen as above their station. They were banned from wearing any sort of garment or apparel whatsoever, finer, other, or of greater value than Negro cloth, duffels, coarse kerseys, osnabrigs, blue linen, checkman, and it just goes on. Since 200 years later, the spirit of that law still in force as African American soldiers were set upon and killed for wearing the Army uniform. Minister Griffin, as a war veteran, would know that a uniform, an Army uniform, that's top quality clothing, right? Right, Minister Griffin, if you have on a uniform, that's top of the line clothing, okay? And so here, saying that these men lost their lives. Here's the one where a Jewish woman, late in the Second World War, a young Jewish woman in Berlin had on a fur coat when the Gestapo rounded her and others up and shoved them into cattle cars to the concentration camp. Upon arrival, the SS were incensed to see a Jewish woman in fur that their wives could likely not afford, and forced her into the camp's pigsty and rolled her in her fur coat over and over in the icy muck, leaving her to die in the bitter cold. But this was just days before the Allied forces reached them, and this was how she survived. Eating the food scraps thrown into the pigsty, she huddled beside the pigs and stayed warm until liberation.
I can't help parallels to Oprah.
What was that?
I can't help but see parallels to John's story about Oprah.
See?
Because they weren't mad about the fur coat. They were mad about who was wearing it.
That's right. Well, first of all, my white wife can't afford it because I can't afford to buy her one. And here this Jew, see, early in one of the chapters, Hitler or the Nazis said they couldn't quite understand why the Jew over here in America wasn't classified with the colored folks. They still couldn't quite get over that. How is it that the Jew ranks higher in America than a colored person? They were amazed over that. They're confused over that. How about that?
And unfortunately, I think there are some people who are. Yeah, I mean, we still see anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic sentiments right and left. But you're right that the Nazis had a point in that it wasn't codified in the same way. Like even within America, it's that same inconsistency.
Right.
Nothing makes sense. It's all made up. It's all nonsense. But unfortunately, it's painful, violent, persistent nonsense.
Yes, yes. Well, there was a comment that was made on page 160, Emily. I think it was by an abolitionist, William Goodell.
Mm-hmm.
When he speaks of the lower caste person, the inherent inferior person, he must be held subject, like other domestic animals. Observed this 19th century abolitionist, William Goodell, the superior race holding dominion over him. You stay in your place, and I think toward the end, there was such a thing called getting too big for yourself, Stay in your place, page 163, because we're at the end of time now. On page 163, it says, we can't end this, Emily. We can't end this particular one without, like on page 163, it says that an African American must look a certain way and act a certain way. That is the way, in other words, you got to beat them or whip them if they begin to get too big, okay? Because this one African American was put to death because he asked for a receipt after paying his water bill. Who does he think that he thinks he deserves a receipt for paying his water bill, which is only typical that if you got common sense, you want receipts.
Well, says, having a receipt proves you paid, so you don't get killed for not paying.
Okay. Here at the bottom of that page, it says, the Negro occupies a position of inferiority and servility of which he is constantly reminded when traveling by restriction and by the attitudes of his white neighbors, wrote the historian Bertram Doyle. If I could, with the time that we don't have left, when it comes to this particular pillar here of this inherent superiority versus inherent inferiority, on page 164, which ends this, it says, the laws and protocols kept them both apart and low. The greater the chasm, the easier to distance and degrade, the easier to justify any injustice or depravity. Okay, in the slaveholding South, it is written, a white woman asked her pastor, is it possible that any of my slaves could go to heaven and I must see them there? That was a question she asked her pastor. But what struck me the most was that some students were challenged in Columbus, Ohio, and asked to consider the question, what to do with Hitler after the war? What to do with Hitler after the war? Now, there's a part in here, there's a story in here where a little boy was forced to jump to his death by this white man who this black boy had written a card to his white daughter, and they punished him by making him jump to his death. But it was, it was the spring of 1944. it says, after this had happened, in that atmosphere, a 16-year-old African-American girl thought about what should befall Hitler in answer to that question. This young lady won the student essay contest with a single sentence. Put him in a skin and let him live the rest of his life in America. What worse fate could happen to one such as Hitler than to come and live in black skin in America? Sad to say. That's pretty deep, would you say? She won, her essay won. Okay? So we will go back to those other pillars.
Yeah.
We won't.
I was gonna say there's nowhere to go from there. She ends the section with that because there's nothing to say after that.
Isn't that something?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yep.
Yes.
I know we're out of time, Emily, but guess what?
We are out of time.
Yeah.
Next session will be on April 13th. So we have 2 Tuesdays in between there. The April 13th, so right before what was tax day at some point.
Okay.
But note that we have off for Holy Week and we have off for the week after Easter. So we'll pick up the week after that.
Okay. Yes.
And we'll cover part 4, which is not the pillars of caste, but the tentacles of caste. Even in the descriptions, she's got some great images for us. So we will move forward with that. Of course, as you're coming through, if there's things you want to lift up for the conversation, just make a note, because I'm noticing as we spend more time together, we're getting a more robust conversation, and that's really great to see. And so I appreciate it. And I appreciate all of you for coming and for coming back to be part of this conversation. I don't know about you, but it's hard for me to go to bed after doing this because my brain is going. So I thank you all for doing that together. We need to pray our way out. But before we do, I want to bring you greetings from Bishop Jenny Abisher. She unfortunately was not able to make it tonight, but she did want to send her greetings and let us know that we are in her prayers. Jackie, would you pray us out?
Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Dear God, we ask that you continue to open our minds and our hearts to the acceptance of new information that may be uncomfortable or incompatible with our current or previous ways of thinking about the world and our place in it. We thank you for this fellowship, for the giving of one's time to take part in conversations that make us feel uncomfortable. We thank you for giving us this opportunity to learn together, to share, to affirm, and to express your love through this reading and through our discussion. We ask, dear God, that you continue to govern our thoughts, our words, and our deeds as we endeavor to do your will in this world at this time. These blessings we ask in your most precious name. Amen.
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 Okay.
Well, thank you again. I hope you have
And everybody, happy Easter.
Yes, a holy and blessed Holy Week and a joyful Resurrection Sunday.
Oh, I forgot that, Emily.
Thank
you. But we're coming back afterwards.
Yes, we're coming back afterwards.
Yeah, it'll be after Easter.
Pastor Jackie, you better remember what Easter is. Otherwise, Ascension's going to have a hard time.
You know what I mean? Yeah, Emily, you did say, I heard you naming the dates, and I was like, oh, yeah, well, I got my dates down, but didn't even hear what you said about us not being together until after Easter. Okay, happy and blessed. Happy Holy Week to everyone.
Bye, everybody.
All right, John.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you so much.
All right. God bless everyone.
Same back.
You. All right.